Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and we have a super special video today. So over the last few days, we've been talking about Amonkhet in various formats, Commander, Modern, and today it's Standard Stirred, and have a very special guest, and that is Chaz. How's it going today, Chaz?
I'm doing well. How's it going, Seth? I'm really excited. I love these videos. Can't wait to talk about Amonkhet. It's been a kind of hectic couple days, so I'm glad we kind of dodged a lot of craziness this time around.
Oh man, me too. So if you follow these videos, you know last time we did standard videos with a set release, we recorded them, we posted them, then like 2 days after the last one went up, Wizards banned 3 cards in standard. This time, we dodged the bullet naturally. Our recording time just happened to work out, so if you're not aware, and I don't know how you couldn't be at this point, last night, well, first off, Monday, Wizards gave us the no changes banning announcement for standard, and then randomly, last night, Wednesday evening, there was a special article with Wizards announcing that Felidar Guardian actually was going to be banned, effective essentially immediately, starting before this weekend's tournaments with the release of Amonkhet. So, Chaz, before we get into our top 10 cards from Amonkhet, what are your thoughts on, first off, the banning, and secondly, standard in general moving forward?
Well, I think this is a really good change for Standard. Obviously, we've talked about it on multiple different levels. We've talked about it on the podcast, and the data was just there. And you've been one that kind of has put that to the forefront. And this is just something that really needed to happen. And I really do think this kind of opens up Standard. Saheeli combo needed to go. And I think everyone overall is going to like the change. And it kind of gives us more of enthusiasm to kind of look at Amonkhet, see all these new cards, and really get to play test with them, where before it would have just kind of still been up in the air. And I think not having that caveat of, well, Saheeli combo still around, actually just makes for a better standard, makes for better content for us, makes better discussions and better deck building. So immediately what I think will happen because of the ban is just a couple things. I think these teamer lists where some of them are playing Dynavolt Tower, some of them are not playing Dynavolt Tower, I think those gain, the most benefit from this because they were already still pretty good even with Saheeli, and now they just gain these extra tools like some of the cards we're going to talk about, but Torrential Gearhulk is still a very good plan, and what do you know? Virtus Gearhulk is still a very good plan because now you can tap out your mana, Seth, and not lose on turn 4. So I do think the green-black Constrictor lists and those teamer kind of, not really control lists, but tempo value instant lists with Torrential Gearhulk are the obvious winners here.
Yeah, I think as far as decks go and old decks, those are two that you could definitely expect to move up in the format a bit. People will revisit them. They'll probably have more of a metagame share now. I think that one of the losers is Mardu vehicles, and this might seem counterintuitive, but I firmly believe that the reason Mardu was so good was because of Copycat and the pressure that Copycat not only put onto your deck building, where you have to have shocks to deal with the combo, so you can't play Magma Spray, and you need to have sideboard slots to beat the combo, so you can't play as much stuff that's good against Mardu, like Artifact Destruction, but also just kind of forcing potentially good against Mardu decks, or potentially good against Mardu decks out of the format. So while this is going to be a janky example, but something like Aetherflux Reservoir can be built to have a really good matchup against Mardu, but when you have a turn 4 combo in the format, your turn 5, turn 6 combo that's maybe better against Mardu just is unplayable. You can't do it. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that I think could come from Kaladesh block that was kind of just pushed back because of this turn 4 combo. So suddenly there's a lot of stuff that's once again worth testing, not just the big decks like Green-Black Constrictor, the Teamer Energy, whatever those decks are, but a lot of lower tier cards and decks that suddenly might have a shot. So I'm super excited. This is one of the weird, rare times where this actually does kind of feel like a Brewer's Paradise, and it's not even a rotational set release, which is pretty rare. So I'm super excited. The changes, I had been saying this is what we should do for a long time, just ban the Guardian, be done with it. I think most of the community was on board with that, so I went from being kind of dreading Standard and watching Pro Tours and SCG events to being maybe more excited than I've been about a Standard format in a long time with just this one announcement. So I think it's going to be awesome, and I'm super excited for it. Let's move on to our list proper. And number 10 on our list, we have Manglehorn, which strangely enough, when we were making this list pre-bannings, was number 1, still on the list. So why is Manglehorn still on our list, Chaz, even though the copycat combo was banned?
Yeah, it still remains on the list because vehicles, I don't really think is going anywhere. It's still a strong archetype, but it does get knocked a peg down a bit, and it's because of cards like Manglehorn, coupled with cards like Magma Spray. But Manglehorn is just a great creature to still be playing because you can still play it kind of on curve, get rid of cards like Heart of Kiran, their Scrap Heap Scroungers, Teamer Tower, even Torrential Gearhulks, they'll come into play tapped. So it's still just a pretty strong creature to have sitting on the battlefield that your opponent has to deal with. And it is kind of funny. You're absolutely right. This started at number 1 before the new kind of addendum to the this emergency banning of Felidar Guardian. It was great against both decks, but now, that, Saheeli, the combo is kind of gone. It does get knocked down a peg, but it's still very much a viable card in Standard.
Yeah, I agree with you. Very good against Mardu vehicles, and we're still coming off Kaladesh block, and there's a lot of very strong artifacts in that set, even beyond Mardu vehicles, but Aetherflux Reservoir, maybe, we didn't mention this, but maybe Colossus decks could have a chance again without the combo being in the format that are playing all these non-creature artifacts to power out their Metalwork Colossus, so there's still a ton of artifacts around, and Manglehorn is one of the most main deckable of the artifact removal spells we got in Amonkhet. There's a lot of them in the format, but Manglehorn is one of the only ones where you're really happy running it in the main deck because it's still a creature, so even if it doesn't do anything super exciting, at least you have a body, when that's not true of like Biforce or something like that, where it'd just be a dead card with no targets.
Yep, good green cards are good, Seth.
All right, number 9 on our list, we have one of my favorite cards from the set, Drake Haven, the cycling payoff, the new Astral Slide, the new Lightning Rift. What are your thoughts on this one, Chaz? And cycling in general, can that be a thing in Standard?
I do think, I do think so. It can work. I mean, you have great enablers like Curator of the Mysteries, you have Cast Out, you have all these innocuous little good cycling cards that can, I think, come together really nicely. And Drakehaven, can get out of control really quickly. It's a very good enchantment to build around because it can just kind of value your opponent out of the game. You don't have to worry about losing straight up, even though you are still in blue. You did have counter magic to kind of combat some of this stuff, but I do think just kind of putting a wall up of 2/2 Drakes that are evasive with flying, it's very hard for some decks to stop. And maybe this kind of becomes this, value. Maybe these teamer lists do start adopting these Drakehavens because they're playing such a heavy package of spells that maybe some of these cycling spells get brought in, and Drakehaven's a great card to build around.
Yeah, it seems like it could be a finisher in some sort of cycling-heavy control/mid-range deck. Also, you got the combo potential. Wizards really push cycling in Amonkhet, so we have, new perspectives, which can kind of let you combo off. Shadow of the Grave has a lot of value with cycling. The cycling lands, of course. So there's a lot of pieces there, and I think it's going to be really fun to build around. This one might be a long shot to end up being like a tier 1 deck, but I think this is a card that a lot of people are going to play just because it seems really fun, and cycling has been one of the mechanics I think people have been most hyped about from Amonkhet.
Yeah, absolutely agree. There's a lot of great enablers out there.
Moving on to number 8 on our list, we have one of Chaz's favorite cards, I believe, from the set. Vizier of the Menagerie. Chaz, you're the one that's high on this one, even more so than me. Where does this one fit?
Yeah, so this suddenly slipped onto the list because, I mean, before, playing a turn 4 Vizier of the Menagerie and then comboing off on turn 4 probably wasn't a great feeling. But I do feel now with standard opening up, you can play these high density creature lists. We've already started seeing that with preliminary deck lists coming out. Based around these like creatures, you have like red green, you have Jund, you have all these kind of different color combinations that can benefit from Vizier of Menagerie because it is a really good card. It gains you a lot of value. It's one of these engine type cards that we've seen and we talked about on the podcast, like Oracle of Moldiah, that have been used in the past, even in these Valakut lists. It kind of reminds me of that, where you can just keep gaining value off of these creatures every single turn. And I do think now that you're able to tap out, you're able to kind of play these creatures with impunity, it does gain a bit of stock and does deserve a spot on this list.
Yeah, I think we could see the potential of some sort of red-green or Teamer Monsters list coming back into the format, which we had a couple of seasons ago. We have Glorybringer, which is the Stormbreath Dragon of the set. We have Verdurous Gearhulk. We have 2-mana Mana Dorks that can ramp into this on turn 3, and then one of your 5-drops on turn 4. And there is a lot of value to be had there, so I think you're right. I wasn't high on this card, but I'm coming around to it in our new standard format, potentially being playable and maybe even very good in the right build without that turn 4 combo. I mean, it just looks so bad when you die on turn 4, but now that's not a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if this is a full 4 of card, but it's definitely that engine card that you can slot a couple into these, like you said, these monster lists that are very high creature density. And the great thing that we talked about on the podcast with this is you don't give away information, so your opponent really doesn't. When you surprise them with all these additional creatures, your opponent's kind of seeing this for the first time, and it's hard to play around. It really is.
Let's move on to number 7 on our list, and that is Censor. This card might not look like much. It looks like a Force Spike, but I'm pretty sure this card is very strong. What do you think about this one, Chaz?
Well, I don't normally play control lists, but I think this would be the first 4 of I would slot into those lists. We're already seeing them, like we keep talking about these teamer lists, but I have to ask you because we've seen different tools before in the last few sets, Seth. Does control kind of benefit from this? Can we finally see a straight-up traditional control list? I do think that it's great in those high-density spell lists like the teamer list where it's just a great tempo play. And does this somehow, slot into other decks outside of that?
I think that it can slot into a lot of decks that are playing blue. I think it can work in those teamer lists. It can work in maybe prowess or spell decks. I think there could be a blue-red Enigma Drake, Bedlam Reveler type deck that you could play with this, because getting yourself into the graveyard for 1 mana is nice. And your Force Spike, the problem with Force Spikes is they just get so bad as the game goes along. When you counter your opponent's 2-drop on turn 2 or 3-drop on turn 2 or turn 3, it's a really powerful effect, but then on turn 7, turn 8, your opponent's going to have lots of mana. It's very much diminishing returns as the game goes along, but Censor solves this problem by cycling itself away, so it can always be a new card. As far as building a control deck, I think we actually have to talk about number 6 on our list as well, and that's Cast Out. So this is where I could see a control list popping up, and this kind of goes back to Drakehaven as well. Blue-White got 2 very strong answer cards, I guess, that both cycle, which gives you that cycling potential, and they're also just really powerful answers. Cast Out is the closest thing we have to a Hero's Downfall right now in Standard, being an instant speed answer to Planeswalkers and to creatures, and it cycles away if you need it to. So I think that we can see a return of control based not just on Censor, but the combination of Censor and Cast Out being so good together.
Yeah, absolutely. It works in a variety of different ways, exactly like you said with Drakehaven. And now that kind of the format doesn't always have to revolve around, turn 4, these, when the game is kind of now paced out a little bit, Cast Out just gets a lot better because you don't have to worry about, just completely dying, and you can play a bit more of these cards now, and it was already really good going into Amonkhet Standard, and I think it will continue to remain a very strong card, and absolutely in tandem with Censored.
Well, since we're talking control lists, we might as well move on to number 5 and add that one in as well, and that is pull from Tomorrow's, kind of the new Sphinx's Revelation. I mean, it's not as good as Sphinx's Revelation, but what do you think of this card draw spell, Chaz?
Yeah, it's really strong. Normally, we've seen these X spells be really good, especially in Standard. Not quite Sphinx's Revelation, yeah, I do agree, but still a very good card in its own right. And all these indirect discard spells, we talked about Drakehaven. This is another card that you just slot into those kind of lists. Discarding is actually really great. You get to choose, and it's after the fact. And it's all these kind of different indirect and direct cycling or discarding that really pull everything together in terms of these value spells lists and even build around cards like Drakehaven.
Yeah, I think this is the card that Control maybe has been missing the most. And if you think back to the Sphinx's Revelation days, it was the huge card draw effect. And Revelation was nice because the life gain was often very helpful as well. And you don't get that with Pull for Tomorrow. But when you can kind of stall out, play some Fumigates, play some Cast Out, censor a speller to get to the point where you have 7 mana, 8 mana, and you just cast this on your opponent's end step and get an entirely new hand, that often just wins you the game. It might not be obvious like a Planeswalker Ultimate or something, but that card advantage often just puts the game out of reach for the opponent, and we haven't had a spell like this since Sphinx's Revelation. We've had card draw, Glimmer of Genius, stuff like that, but the fact that we have this finishing huge X draw spell and its instant speed, I think is going to be a huge deal for control decks. Can also be helpful for those teamer decks we've been talking about, but I think it's going to be very good in anything that's slow or controlling and running blue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the cards that gained the most stock. It was already great. Its actual discard spell works on a multiple different levels. It combos with so many different things. You just pitch a card with you're already probably playing Torrential Gear Hulks because that's still a thing in Standard. So it's just doing a whole mess of great stuff for what control and spell value players really want to be doing.
Well, let's move on to number 4 on our list, and Chaz, it's another green card, so I'll let you talk about Ronis the Indomitable, the Green God. Take it away, Chaz.
Man, green is really good in this set. I think that's kind of an understatement. But yeah, Ronis, I think, out of the gate is the clear winner in terms of the God cycle. It's the easiest to turn on. I think now with especially the banning, the kind of emergency ban announcement, this kind of monsters list that's been forming, this red-green aggro or some kind of moving into Jund or Naya, but these creature lists, these high-density creature lists, I mean, Ronis is just fantastic, and you can kind of now play those cards like Prey Upon or something like that you can play in the sideboard that come out. It's still a creature always. It's not like the Theros gods where they kind of turn on. They're always creatures having Death Touch. It's basically a 1-mana removal, but on a multitude of levels, this is just fantastic. And I think early on in Standard, Ronis will be a huge winner, and maybe as the meta changes and we go along, more gods will be viable because the meta will constantly shift. But early on, I think Ronis, it's just easy to turn on. It's very, cost efficient, and it's, there's a lot of different cards you can play around it. Bristling Hydra, this Vizier the Menagerie kind of engine. So there's just so many different ways to build around this card.
Yeah, I think Ronis is going to be very good in the immediate future. I think we have the answers in Standard, thankfully, with Declarations in Stone and some other exile effects that if things get too out of control, there are ways to deal with it, which makes me feel comfortable with Ronis and the gods in general. But I think that you're right, and it's partly because, like you've been saying, green is just really good. It got a lot of support. It got a lot of powerful cards. Already had a lot of powerful cards going back to the green-black energy list, which we mentioned is probably one of the winners of the bannings as far as old decks, could definitely slot into there, the monsters list. So there's a ton of different places that Ronis can fit, and the ability to give things trample is also really scary. That breaks through board stalls, allows you to finish out the game and get in damage. So I think that Ronis is going to see a lot of play and be played in a ton of different archetypes. Well, let's move on to one of the cards that maybe was underrated in the beginning, but has definitely been catching on. Number 3 on our list, the dragon from the set, Glorybringer. Chaz, what do you think about the new Hasty Flyer?
I loved it since I first saw it. It's really powerful, Seth. I mean, like we were just saying, we've talked about all these kind of different archetypes. You have Ronis, you have now Glorybringer that we can talk about. This thing is just doing a ton of good stuff. The one thing that we didn't talk about as much as the video has been going along is Vehicles is still around, and Gideon Ally of Zendikar is still around. And there's another card later in the video that we'll be talking about. So having a evasive, hasted, large power creature is something that is definitely valuable in this standard. Being able to combat those Gideons, being able to be evasive, take down creatures that can crew stuff, take down these Heart of Kirans that are still going to be around, and being able to threaten those Gideons is such a big deal.
Yeah, I think Gideon is probably the early pick post-banning to just once again be the best card in Standard, and Glorybringer lines up really well with it. Coming down with haste as a 4/4 is exactly enough that if your opponent plays a Gideon, makes a token, you just immediately can Glorybringer and kill it, and if you want to, you can exert and kill the token or something else. So I think the role of Gideon Sniper is really important, and Glorybringer is far and away the best card at that, and there's just a lot of value there. A hasty 4/4 flyer for 5 isn't bad, and the exert's just kind of upside. You don't have to use the exert, obviously, but there's going to be some scenarios where being a removal spell is really good, and in some ways it reminds me of Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker, which is kind of a 4/4 flyer that could also do 4 damage to a creature. Of course, you can't do it in the same turn, so there's a little bit of a difference, but it kind of reminds me of Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker in that sense. So I expect that not only is Glorybringer just powerful, but it's going to line up really well with our post-banning Amonkhet Standard format.
Absolutely. And you don't have to exert it, but it does deal with a lot of different cards in this format that are still around. I mean, you're talking about Grim Flayers, all these energy-based creatures like Greenbelt Rampager. It just takes out quite a bit of the format with 4 damage. You don't realize how many creatures that actually takes out. But, yeah, all around Glorybringer is just an amazing card.
Well, let's move on to number 2 on our list, and this is actually a whole group of cards, and that is the Cycling Land. So I'm super excited for these. Chaz, what do you think about this cycle of dual lands?
Oh, yeah, they're absolutely great. Playing with them, they feel great. Now, they kind of remind me, and we talked about this on the podcast a little bit, of the Scry lands. You're giving an additional value to these aggressive lists and even these mid-range lists now that'll probably start coming back as a way to kind of cycle, obviously, these additional lands to get rid of dead cards out of your hand that you don't need later on in the game. And it's just a great feeling to be able to do that. And the color fixing, obviously, is always great to have.
Yeah, even discounting cycling decks that might care about cycling, like the Drakehaven deck, if that's a thing, they're just very strong lands in anything that's mid-rangey or controlling. The ability to trade the downside of a land that enters the battlefield tapped for the upside of getting rid of a land when you're flooding out in the late game and you really need another action spell is a great trade-off to make. I think they're worse in aggro, especially since we have a lot of lands that can come into play untapped. So if you're playing straight up 2-color aggro, I think you might shy away from these. Not that you might not play some number, but coming into play tapped all the time is a little bit annoying in a straight up aggro deck. Plus, you might not have the mana over the first few turns to actually cycle these away. But in anything mid-range or control, I expect these to be super popular, and of course, staples in the cycling decks and potential in older formats as well. I know that's not our focus today, but cycling and loaming stuff back in Modern and whatnot seems really sweet as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a great cycle, and there's just a multitude of ways to utilize these.
Well, let's move on to our number one card from Amonkhet for Standard, and that is the new Planeswalker, Gideon of the Trials. And Chaz, just yesterday I played an Against the Odds deck featuring Gideon in Modern, and I can confirm that this card is very good and very sweet, and I am super excited for it, but I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Gideon?
I did see that. Yeah, Gideon is pretty good. I mean, I don't know. There's still that issue set that we talked about. How many Gideon of Ally of Zendikar do you play? How many Gideon of the Trials do you play? But I can confirm that a turn 3 Gideon is pretty hard to stop. I mean, it's kind of that turn where it's just too good if it gets online that you really can't threaten it early on. And the emblem is, if you are playing some number of all these Gideons, the emblem can actually be pretty problematic if you have no way to continue to remove these Gideons off the battlefield. I mean, there's a lot of ways to protect it. I do think early on, like the Heart of Kiran that is not going anywhere is so great with this +1, because it's kind of, you're locking down these creatures, but you can still attack with a Heart of Kiran with impunity, and I think that's a really great pair that we're going to see very early on in Standard.
Oh yeah, that is a very impressive synergy. Not to mention Gideon being an answer to opposing Heart of Kiran's, which is pretty nice because you can target a permanent, so it does hit a non-active Heart of Kiran with its prevent all the damage it would deal, which is super good and super important. It allows you to play your Gideon and immediately just plus it and not have Gideon die to your opponent's Heart of Kiran, which would be something that would be problematic. And then the math on Gideon and Heart of Kiran, when you have both of them, is really sweet. If you Heart of Kiran on turn 2, you can plus your Gideon and crew up your Heart of Kiran, which is 4 damage. Then the next turn, Gideon plus Heart of Kiran is 8 damage. The next turn, 8 damage. That equals 20 damage on turn 5. Of course, your opponent's going to have blockers and stuff to deal with, but that's just 2 cards, a 2-drop and a 3-drop. So if you can back that up with removal, they're both non-creatures, so you could actually wrath the board and get rid of all your opponent's blockers and keep beating down. So that was one of the synergies I was most impressed by playing with Gideon of the Trials a little bit, is just how good it is both with and against Heart of Kiran.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it just stops so many different things, even early on and later on in the game when you're drawing multiples. Maybe you have the emblem at that point, but you can stop certain cards, like even Harsh Mentor's triggers from happening, because Harsh Mentor's trigger is the Harsh Mentor's dealing the damage, so now it doesn't it's all these like little cards that you don't think of right away. It stops the Harsh Mentor. Glorybringer, like we just said, it can't exert it and deal extra damage. So it really does stop a lot of different things in this format.
And I've kind of come around to the idea that I think you can play Gideon of the Trials and Ally of Zendikar in the same deck. I think that it's possible to play more than just 4 Gideons without being too clunky, because especially with these Planeswalkers, because Gideon, Ally of Zendikar actually is pretty fine when you just Anthem it right away, especially if you're playing a deck that can take advantage of the Anthem effect with the creatures. And Gideon of the Trials isn't that bad if it only sticks around for a little while anyway, because you can immediately get the emblem, which gives you some nice value over the long game. So I wouldn't be surprised to see 8 Gideon decks running around in Standard, or at least like 6 or 7 Gideon decks running around in Standard.
Yeah, I mean, it could even be more, Seth. It could be more. I don't know. Can it port over to Standard? Can we play the Planeswalker tutors? Like, I'm really excited to see where that goes. But yeah, Gideon of the Trials is, I think, with, especially considering the new emergency ban, it was already really strong. And I think this just kind of had to be pushed up into 1, because this is something we're going to see for quite some time, I think. Early on in Standard, even when the meta shifts, I do think it has a spot no matter what.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that's been our top 10 Standard cards for Amonkhet. And going into this list, I was a little worried pre-bannings that we were going to do this list, and every card we'd be saying, oh, like, this card's really sweet, but it's going to die to the combo, or it's not good enough for the format, or maybe if we get really lucky. So I'm super happy with how things worked out this time with the bannings happening, so we can talk about this exciting new format instead of all this, I don't know, the cloud hanging over Standard with the copycat combo. So Chaz, any last thoughts on anything in Amonkhet Standard as we head out the door today?
It's really wide open, Seth. I do think there's some clear early archetypes that we will see that we talked about in this video, but you're absolutely right. I'm so happy we got to do this video. It was really exciting to talk about these cards. This list has changed now with this banning, but I do think that we talked about all these different cards in Amonkhet that we can see in Standard that have brewed around, and maybe there's even more now that this Standard is really kind of for a few weeks we have until the Pro Tour. It's kind of like, brewers everywhere. They're going to be happy. They're going to be able to find these interactions that maybe wouldn't have happened if we're, like you said, we had this looming cloud of this combo that, people didn't really want to deal with anymore. So I'm really happy, and thanks for having me on, Seth. This was so much fun.
Oh, well, thank you for taking the time to do it, Chaz. It's always fun. I definitely appreciate it. And big thanks to everyone for watching. So let us know in the comments, what cards are you excited about for Standard now that we have this exciting, fresh, post-banning format? What else is there from Amonkhet that can make waves? Let us know, because we're excited to hear all of your thoughts as well. Anyway, thanks again, Chaz, for taking the time to join me today. Thanks to everyone for watching, and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks, everyone. Hope you enjoy it, and we will see you all for the next set.
Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.